hard to understand, at least it was for me, why God allows suffering. Why does a loving God let these things happen to his children? And I personally really struggled with that. And I found, in the caregiving role that a lot of caregivers do the same. It's one thing, and it's hard to deal with personal suffering, but when you're watching it, a loved one walk through that valley, it's just a little bit different, and it's really hard. It's really hard. But God's been faithful, and as we walk through it, even though there were times where I felt alone, I can look back now and just see all the ways in which he was so faithful. And I think my faith now is stronger because of it.
That's the voice of Amy Chastain, a former registered nurse and 15-year caregiver. She came to realize that the Lord was calling her beyond the obvious caregiving in front of her, giving her a mission to minister to caregivers. As a result, Chastain started a faith-based caregiver support website and wrote a book, Enduring Together, Strength for the Weary Caregiver. Amy Chastain is my guest in this episode of the Practical Faith Academy podcast, which launches Season 5. I'm Cecil Taylor of Cecil Taylor Ministries, teaching Christians how to live a 7-day practical faith. Everything I do, whether blogs, books, or videos, is about taking our faith from Sunday into the rest of the week, applying scripture and faith to life situations. I'm also interested in children and parents, as I've written a book entitled Unison Parenting, the comprehensive guide to navigating Christian parenthood with one voice. You can find more about it in the podcast notes, as well as much more about my ministry and how it can help you. In the Practical Faith Academy podcast, I add other voices with other life experiences to understand how they put faith into practice. Please subscribe to my podcast according to your listening platform's instructions, and I welcome your comments and your sharing of this podcast with others. I'm pleased to start off the 5th season of my podcast and the 2nd season in the Practical Faith Academy format with Amy Chastain, here to look at faith through the paradigm of caregiving. Amy, welcome to the Practical Faith Academy.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here today.
When I say 7-day practical faith, what does that mean to you?
Oh, for me, that kind of gets down into the nitty-gritty, right? It's the everyday, the 7-day, right? Our faith is not just for Christmas and Easter. It's not just for Sunday mornings when we go to church, although those are wonderful things. I have found that a lot of times we put this heavy emphasis on the special things, the big things, the big moments, right? But really, most of our lives are lived in those everyday, mundane, run-of-the-mill, not always fun times. And I think those little moments, that's where our 7-day faith is. It's just in those little pieces of our lives that they may not get a lot of attention, but really that's what makes up our days. And I think that's precious in the sight of the Lord.
I like that answer. I'm going to map it into something I used to do with youth ministry, because in youth ministry, what gets all the attention are the mission trips and the retreats and different things like that. The mountaintop experiences, and everybody thinks that's what youth work is. But from being in youth ministry for 30 years, I can tell you what it really is the weekly brick by brick that you stack up in a teen's or young person's life. And the mountaintop experiences hopefully attract them to stick with it and go through the everyday. So I guess that's a way to think about it. From what you're saying, it reminded me maybe 7-day practical faith is kind of laying those bricks every day for ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I have teenagers, and I think so much of it that laying the bricks like you're talking about is really building relationship. And I think that in our day-to-day lives, that's true too. That's our interactions, our service, whatever it is that we're doing, our jobs. Those are built around relationship and how we can serve and love one another.
I love that. It's also relationship with God and relationship with others. Yeah, that's great. You've been a caregiver for 15 years. I can't even imagine that. How has being a caregiver impacted or affected your faith journey?
Well, from this point, I can say that it has really strengthened my faith. There are points along the way where I might have questioned that. I definitely walked through the struggles, which at the time I felt like, oh, this means my faith isn't strong enough. I really struggled with that. But I think that's just part of the journey, right? Those times it's really hard to understand, at least it was for me, why God allows suffering. Why does a loving God let these things happen to his children? And I personally really struggled with that. And I found, in the caregiving role that a lot of caregivers do the same. It's one thing, and it's hard to deal with personal suffering, but when you're watching a loved one walk through that valley, it's just a little bit different, and it's really hard. It's really hard. But God's been faithful, and as we walk through it, even though there were times where I felt alone, I can look back now and just see all the ways in which he was so faithful. And I think my faith now is stronger because of it.
Amy has written the book Enduring Together, Strength for the Weary Caregiver, that just came out in March. And Amy, I thought I knew what caregiving was like because my wife has chronic ailments and I've supported her. And that's a caregiving journey too. But then I took over my mother's care in her final years and I gained a new level of understanding. And so before, when friends would talk about their caregiving experience, I kind of saw it, okay, well, that's tough for you. And then now when friends say, oh, my mom's on the downslide, then I can really understand and empathize in a different way. And I truly understand the challenges. So I'm wondering, what do you wish other people knew about caregiving, looking into it from the outside?
Oh, well, I wish they knew that it's okay to talk about it. I think that's one of the things, and you kind of just touched on it there when you said, people would say, "Oh, I'm doing this caregiving." You go, "Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah." The most recent statistics show that about 1 in 5 Americans right now is a caregiver, and that encompasses everyone from, like you talked about, your experience, kind of helping your wife and taking care of your parent. Those people are all caregivers, and I found myself that was. Something I processed a little bit, and I hear it from other caregivers on both ends, right? Like, oh, well, but I'm not really, I don't really want to count myself as a caregiver. I'm only grocery shopping for my mom twice a week and taking her to the doctor. It's not like, she has advanced Alzheimer's, but I think there's so many people going through it, and a lot of us feel lonely in the crowded room, because it's just very easy to start to kind of slip into that, and that just becomes what you're doing. And I think a lot of us lose ourselves a little bit in the process. So I'd say just, don't be afraid to bring it up. Don't be afraid to really ask that caregiver that and you probably know one, how are you doing? How are you doing with all the caregiving right now? What's going on?
Yeah, I did that recently with my stepmom helping out my father because she kept giving me reports on my father. And I said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "I'm exhausted," right? So
Right.
it's good to have that conversation. But what do you think friends and family can do actually to support caregivers?
So one of the biggest things I hear, we're all really good most of the time, I think, about saying, oh, let me know if you need some help. Let me know if there's something I can do. A lot of caregivers, I mean, some people will tell you, hey, do this for me. But a lot of us are either because we don't like asking for help, or we're afraid to, or we're just so overwhelmed. Sometimes that's like asking me to figure out what chore to give you is just one more thing. I've heard over and over from people who were in that situation to say, please just offer to do a specific thing, and that's going to be different for everyone. Maybe you see your neighbor is struggling. You can say, hey, let me pick up the kids today and keep them after school for a little while you do X, Y, Z, or maybe it's, I'm going to the grocery store, give me your list and I'm going to bring you your groceries. Everybody's needs vary, but offering to do something specific without asking them to assign it to you can be really helpful.
And I would think listening is a big part of that too. To understand what would be valuable or where the caregiver seems to have pain points.
Absolutely. And that depends on your relationship with the caregiver. And a lot of us, even if we're not what would be defined as a caregiver, we're still kind of supporting that community. My parents have an elderly widow for a neighbor who she's got some health challenges, and they bring her mail up to her front porch. She has steps up to the house. They get her mail every day and put it up there. And if they notice, they check as they're doing their daily little walks around the neighborhood, right? They'll see if the mail has been taken off the porch, and if it hasn't, then that prompts a knock on the door or a phone call just to kind of check in and make sure she's okay. And that's part of again, I think just us being in community and being present with one another, and just noticing, and just trying to be connected to the people that are around us.
Yeah, kindness starts with awareness. So I agree with that. So Amy, you have a blog that you write. I was reading through some of your blog posts, and I was really struck by this phrase that I wish I had known when I was going through some really critical times in my caregiving of my mom. You wrote, "I needed to discern, not just decide." I just love that phrase. So what is your advice to caregivers in terms of discerning what to do rather than deciding what to do?
So I found myself in that place and in a really hard moment. And I think that caregivers often, we're thrust into these situations sometimes, right? We don't always see caregiving coming down the road. Sometimes we see it, mom and dad are aging. It's normal, typical stuff. Sometimes there's, someone has a heart attack or a stroke, or there's an unexpected accident or diagnosis. And it can be really easy in those moments to run on adrenaline and to run on fear, which is something I definitely struggled with. And me personally, when I get in those situations, I tend to just act very quickly. And I've learned that acting quickly is not necessarily the best. Sometimes you do have to act quickly in an emergency, obviously, but I really needed to take a minute and pray about it and really go back to, what does God say about this? And even if there's not a specific, I can't go to the Bible and it's going to tell me your mother-in-law just had a stroke, this is what you should do. Right. But when we go to him and we ask for wisdom and we ask for direction, and then we have to wait a minute and listen, right? Wait. And that's the discerning, right? But for me, I found that oftentimes I was skipping that step of, something happened, and I was just springing into action without praying about it and without asking God for help. And that was a mistake on my part.
Well, I love that phrase, discern versus decide. I promise you it's going to show up in a blog or a book or something I do sometime, because it's in here now. I did write a book that's on general crisis management for Christians, called The Next Thing. And in there I wrote about the need to not only trust God, but to trust the people God brings to you, because God will bring people to you, but then you have to discern who those people are, and is this the right fit? In the case of my mother-in-law passing away, you're dealing with a real estate person you don't know, or somebody in hospice care that you don't really know, and what's the right route to go? Even auctioning off her materials in a strange town, right? How do I trust people? So my wife and I were trying to discern, is this the right thing? What is your thought on that? I'm sure you've experienced that, or you advise also, relying on others to help you. How do you discern this is the one that is going to help me?
Sometimes I think it is who just God places in your path. But I mean, we live in a broken world with sinful people, and I hate to have to say this, but there are people who take advantage in situations. Mm-hmm. So I would say, do your due diligence, right? Check, if you're working with a company, check the Better Business Bureau, do a Google search, see if there's complaints. But it has been helpful for me working with personal referrals. If you know someone who has worked with them before, and they can tell you about their experience, I've found that to be beneficial, certainly. But if you don't have that available, which oftentimes, especially if you're in a different town, you don't have your contacts there, ask for references and then actually call them and talk to them. And, don't be afraid to ask probing questions. This is, whether it's the person you're caregiving for, or if they've passed and you're trying to take care of their estate. I mean, that's still your responsibility. And, you've been entrusted with that. So I think it's important that we put aside maybe any discomfort that kind of comes with that territory, and just still be an advocate for a loved one.
I think you start to see also God's providence for you when something like that, like for example, in our case, the one we started with was the funeral director, because we knew him from a prior funeral and had some trust, also knew him previously just personally. So when we said, well, we need this, he said, well, I know a guy, and then when we were working with that guy, we needed something else. He said, well, I know this lady, and on and on. So we stepped into a chain of relationships that every one of them felt like an unfolding for us. So I guess I would encourage our listeners to think about that in caregiving situations, and looking to people who you trust that will also bring other people to you like that.
Absolutely. It's hard enough. It's a hard enough road to walk. And I would absolutely encourage people to use the resources that are available to them. And a lot of that is word of mouth.
You mentioned a few moments ago, and I want to circle back to it, about we get into a position where caregiving looms in our future. So what steps should people take in advance to prepare themselves for a caregiving situation?
Well, everyone's situation is different. There are some very common things that are going to come up with caregiving that I think are helpful to address in advance. I think one of the common situations would be, you have aging parents. I think it's important to actually have the discussion with them about what they want. What would you want if this were the situation? For example, my husband is at increased risk for Alzheimer's because his father had Alzheimer's. And he's been very clear that he would not want me to have the burden of taking care of him at home until the very end. He's like, nope, you put me in memory care. And he probably tells me that because he knows I would try to take care of him at home. But we've had the conversation. So there's the question of what would my loved one want, and kind of figuring out if that's realistic for your family or not. If grandma says, don't ever put me in a nursing home, I want to come live with you, and but you've got stairs and she can't manage stairs. There's things you got to think about in advance. So living arrangements are one thing to kind of keep an eye on, and think, well, what would we do if this needed to change? Finances are another big one. Everyone has different amounts of resources. Some people are, really blessed that it's just, well, we hire this and we go here and we pay for this. And others, it's a real struggle. And a lot of caregivers either reduce their work hours. Sometimes they change jobs to a less demanding. And a lot of them even retire or step out of the workforce for a while. And so just as their expenses are piling up, they're having reduced income. So things you can do to plan for that, whether it means, starting to build a savings account, or just whether it's having those discussions. Maybe there's 4 kids in the family and they need to start talking about how they're going to share costs when mom and dad have healthcare needs. But just having those conversations and having at least some sort of loose game plan in place can give you a better, we're not really in control of it, but it can at least provide a little bit of structure, a framework from which to start moving forward if something happens.
It strikes me as I ask that question that sometimes we don't get the chance to prepare for caregiving. It could be a special needs child. It could be an accident that has happened. And every situation will be different. But do you have any kind of quick start ideas if somebody is suddenly thrust into a caregiving situation to find their footing?
Oh, well, ask for help, or at least accept it when people offer it. It is okay to say, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm overwhelmed. I need assistance. And I hear this actually more from women, anecdotally. I hear more guilt from women, and I hear more of that whole they're trying to do it all themselves, versus the male caregivers I've talked to. often didn't seem to break stride with, oh, well, I needed extra help, so I hired this person and I did this and that. So I think there's a little bit of a divide there. Like I said, it's not hard research, but anecdotally, that's what I hear. And I think I was in that category of, I felt like if I'm a good daughter or a good granddaughter or a good daughter-in-law or whatever it was, that I should be able to do this without asking for help. I should just love them enough to be able to do it all. And of course, that's ridiculous, but that was my thought process. And that was part of, kind of how God called me through this and showing me that that's not what he's calling me to do. That's his job, not my job. I can't cure it. I can't fix it. And that our trust needs to be in him. But if you are suddenly thrust into that, oftentimes the most help people are going to get is right at the beginning of that crisis, right? Take advantage of it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And, build your support system. Just recognize that you're going to need it, and that's okay. It's okay that you can't do it by yourself. You're not supposed to.
Amy Chastain is my guest on the Practical Faith Academy podcast. And Amy, this really leads into the question of self-care. I think that you have to have that mix, a proper amount of self-care, and it's the last thing you want to tend to if you can help it. But you can get worn out, like I was talking about my stepmom earlier. So what's your advice to caregivers needing self-care?
Self-care is vital. It's not selfish. And I know, some people hear self-care and they're thinking, oh, a massage and a day at the spa and go on a Caribbean vacation. That's not what I mean. Although if you can do those things, more power to you. Have a blast. But self-care is nutrition, sleep, exercise. Not saying go run a marathon, but maybe take a walk around the block, get a little fresh air, because the reality is that if you allow yourself, and it's really hard, and I've allowed myself to get run down, you're more likely to get sick. Caregivers are notorious for skipping medical appointments, putting off their own needs. They're too busy. They don't have time. They don't, they can't leave their loved one by themselves. But take that thought process forward a little bit, right? Because what is the fear? The fear is, well, what if something happens to me? Who's going to take care of them? Because really it's all about, they're trying to make sure their loved one is taken care of. But it's like they say on the airplane, right? If it loses pressure, the oxygen masks come down, put your own mask on first. Because if you pass out from lack of oxygen, you can't help the child sitting next to you. You have to take care of yourself. And it can be in small little increments, listen to your favorite music while you're doing some caregiving task, but try to add it in. It's so necessary.
What do you think God does to help with our self-care?
He constantly calls us to him. If we go to his word, he tells it, like, our bodies and our earthly lives here, they're a gift. And what we do for the least of those, we do for him. And we're so good usually at giving that mercy and that care to other people, but he wants it for us too. And I think recognizing that we are called to take care of ourselves also, not to always put ourselves first in a selfish way, but to honor the gifts that God has given us and to be able to refuel. I mean, Jesus had people around him so often, but he would retreat by himself to pray. He needed that, and it's okay. Like, he gives us models. And, I don't think God ever stops chasing after us. And, if we find ourselves in a place of exhaustion and sometimes anger, a lot of people don't want to admit to that, but anger comes with the territory. There's a lot of hard feelings sometimes in these situations. Maybe that's his red flag for us of, hey, eyes over here, maybe you need some help. Maybe you need to come back over here to me.
It's a good thought, a good reminder that even Jesus needed self-care, right? Even he needed alone time. I want to ask you a couple of questions about faith. And what's the hardest part, do you think, about putting faith into practice?
The fact that we're human and we fail. it's, again, those things that seem so easy, right? Love your neighbor. It sounds great. Well, what if your neighbor is that person that was just really, really rude to you? What if, it doesn't mean your literal neighbor, and when you, especially in those situations, if you're caregiving and you've had very little sleep and you're running on fumes and you've been in the hospital and this, that, and the other, and people are aggressive with you, or the person that you take care of, is angry with you, which happens sometimes, especially with either if the relationship was not good to begin with, or dementia related diseases often have that effect of some behavior issues. It is really hard to carry on in the face of that. And so, for me, I know I fail. I do, but I try. And I think part of that is just remaining rooted in the Lord and just going back. We know that he loves us and forgives us, but that doesn't mean we just stop trying, right? That means that we are repentant when we mess up and that we try to go forward. But, not everybody makes it easy to love them. It's hard, and it's a daily walk. It is a daily walk of reminding yourself that, when you're faced with those hard interactions, that person is also a child of God and he loves them just as much as he loves you. And I'd say, even especially if that person is not a believer, how much more important is it to model the love of Christ? So I try to use that as my reminder in the day-to-day hard moments.
Yes. Love is very messy. It's not a Hallmark card, is what I say.
Exactly.
Unless they have a very unusual Hallmark card. But what's your best tip for our listeners to develop and then maintain a 7-day practical faith?
I would start with prayer, right? Like, a lot of people say, oh, read this book, or, read this book of the Bible, or read one Psalm a day. And there's lots of things you can do. For me, it was going from a place of, okay, I believe in Jesus and I love Jesus, to really building relationship. How do you build relationship? Spending time and talking. Prayer does not have to be you're on your knees at the side of your bed at night. Now I lay me down to sleep, right? I pray in the car. I pray in the shower. I pray when my teenagers talk back and I have to think about it before I respond, right? Life is messy. Life is messy, but I think, for me at least, prayer and just talking and having that ongoing conversation with the Lord is what has been just vital for my 7-day faith.
I think that's a great tip for people to use, is to constantly be in contact with our Lord. Let's wrap up. I so appreciate you kicking off this podcast season with me. Tell our listeners about your book, how they can find it, and how they can follow you for some of the things you do on your website.
Oh, great. So my book is called Enduring Together, Strength for the Weary Caregiver. And that was born out of a season of difficulty in my own life. And I just feel like it's kind of what the Lord called me. This is my ministry, is trying to take care of those who are taking care of others. It is a Christian book. We talk about doing perspective shifts to get out of that mindset of seeing things through your own eyes and into looking at it in the way that the Lord would look at it. It is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Books Million, and all those good places. I can be found at my website, which is amychastain.com. And I am on Instagram and Facebook as Amy Chastain Author. And I would love to hear from any of your readers, listeners, and if they have questions or if there's anything I can do for them.
Amy, I so appreciate you being with us today, and I think everybody's going to get a lot out of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That's Amy Chastain, and blessings on her mission to care for caregivers. Next up this month on the Practical Faith Academy podcast is Kathy Culver Garland, co-author of the book Revelationship. Kathy will get you thinking differently about your practical faith journey and your relationship with God. She describes the cycle of God revealing more to us about the nature of the Holy Trinity when we get closer to God. Every move closer brings greater revelation, which invites us into deeper and deeper relationship. Kathy is a fascinating, insightful guest, and I'm truly excited about her upcoming episode in the latter half of May. I'm also very excited to share the news with you that I am making a tantalizing offer on my websites. My book, Unison Parenting, is now available for just $10 plus free shipping, plus more than $200 in bonuses. You heard that right. Unison Parenting sells for $23 on the big sites, but I'm cutting out the middleman and offering it for $10 with free shipping in the US. Part of the bonus material are 2 guides: The Fundamentals of Discipleship for structuring your child's faith growth, and 5 Ways to Love Your Child, a model of applying the fruits of the Spirit to show love for your child. You can access the sale from unisonparenting.com or from ceciltaylorministries.com. You can find the links in the podcast show notes. I really hope you'll stay in touch with my ministry by visiting ceciltaylorministries.com and registering for my 2 free monthly newsletters. In the first half of the month, I deliver Backstage Pass, a newsletter I started this year that has quickly become popular. I go behind the scenes to share insider information about Cecil Taylor Ministries. In the second half of the month comes Monthly Connections, which suggests practical faith tips, recaps and previews ministry work, and more. Sign up now on the homepage and receive a free gift that is described in the show notes below. Until next time, remember, God sends you into the world every day.